I'm really proud and honored to be invited here, all of you who have taken the evening to come out and share it with me. I'm very honored that you did that. I also want to say that several of the communities, where is the Stop Refinery Shy people? I thought that was you. Those people need to learn from the other leadership about polite people get poisoned, shy people get poisoned. You need to stand up and speak out, and none of us are very articulate. We speak from our heart. I think it's very worthwhile. But the people from the refinery and the people from this community who's fighting the Silicon Desert facility are groups of people who are blessed. You are groups of people who have choices. You're not like South Phoenix, where they were poisoned and they didn't have a choice. It's not like the Motorola facility, where people were poisoned and they don't have choices. Those people need support and need help to continue their struggle. But the people in this community have a chance that none of those other folks had. And you have a chance that I never had at Love Canal. You have a chance that we never had. Nobody asked us at Love Canal whether this was a good thing. Nobody even put a little notice in our newspaper about Love Canal was going to be built. There was no warning, just like there was no warning for the folks with the contaminated water supply, the folks who are struggling with the fire, the folks who are struggling in so many other communities across Arizona. You all have a choice. And whatever it takes to stop it, you've got to do it. There is no politeness. People are saying they are going to poison you. Now they're saying they're going to poison you just a smidgen. And they say they're only going to poison you with a couple chemicals. And they say that they're going to do it within the law. But our laws do not equal justice. It is perfectly legal in this country to poison people. When you hear a permit, or when you talk about how clean is clean, or how clean do we have to clean up the TCE, or how clean do we have to clean up the houses in the residential areas around the fire, you're talking about laws that say it's okay to poison people. Because nobody's saying, put it back the way it was. Put it back without the chemicals. Put it back the way it was before somebody made huge profits and walked and left it for us. You folks are blessed. And those who have suffered, my heart is with you and I support you, and we can continue to struggle together. I want to tell you a little bit about Love Canal because I think Love Canal is very symbolic of everything from the school fight to the fires to what you're struggling with here. And for those who don't have a facility, think about everything that I'm saying could be you. No, this is not Love Canal. It's not a dump site. It's not in the ground. It's not leaking. It's a landfill, a dump site in the sky. It's the same thing. It's just not hidden by dirt. And you will be able to see it. At Love Canal, much like, for those who aren't familiar with where Love Canal is in Niagara Falls, New York, 5 miles upstream of the actual Niagara Falls, 5 miles upstream of the 7th wonder of this world. Love Canal is the 8th wonder of this world. I don't come to this as a trained organizer or a person who's had public training or a scientist. My goodness, I couldn't even pronounce half of those chemical words for many years. I still can't pronounce some of them. But I moved into Love Canal as a homemaker. I had a high school education. I had a C average in high school. My dream of what I wanted to do with my life was very simple. My daddy was a bricklayer, and he worked in the steel industry. The whole area where we were was a lot of industrial belt, they call it. And my mother was a full-time homemaker. She raised 6 of us children and did a pretty decent job. and I hope that I can do the same with mine. And when I got out of school, what I wanted to do was be a full-time homemaker. I wanted to have some children and raise them in the same way my mother did. And so after I graduated from school, I did what most of the young women in our community did, and I went off and I found my sweetheart, and we got married, and we had our very first child. And then when our child was a year old, we decided we were ready to buy a house, to buy our piece of the American dream. And so we found this modest house in Niagara Falls. It was a 3-bedroom ranch house. It wasn't anything exceptional, but it was ours. It was our piece of the American dream. My husband was working in the chemical industry. And we moved in and we had everything. At least in our vision of the American dream. We had a station wagon, we had a house, we had a picket fence, we had a swing set, we had HBO. Okay? It's a piece of that dream. Now I understand the new piece of the American dream is you have to have internet. So those who are looking to find that American dream can think about that. And we moved in and everything was fine, and I was excited, and we bought a swing set in the backyard, and we bought a wood stove in our basement so that it would be warm and we could have a family room down there. But after living there for 4 years, my 1-year-old son, who was perfectly healthy when we moved in, became very sick. He developed asthma. He developed epilepsy, where he would have grand mal seizures and just fall on the floor and vibrate. And all we could do as parents is stand there and wait till it was over. He developed a liver problem. He developed a urinary tract disorder which required 2 operations to correct. He developed an immune system problem where they discharged him from the hospital because he had no immune system, very similar to the AIDS victims, except for his wasn't due to a virus such as AIDS. And they told me to bring him home and keep him at home because it was too dangerous for him to stay in the hospital with all the infections there. It was one thing after another, and I kept scratching my head saying, what's going on? No one told me about Love Canal. I conceived and carried my second child at Love Canal, my daughter Melissa. And when Melissa was born, I thought everything was fine. She seemed to be perfectly healthy. And then after a short while, Melissa too got very sick. On Friday, Melissa developed bruises on her body. And on Saturday, the bruises on her body got larger. And by Sunday, Melissa had bruises on her body that looked like the size of a saucer underneath a coffee cup. On Monday, I took my little girl to the doctor and said, what's going on? What is wrong with her? She has these bruises all over her body. She looks like a child abuse case. And the doctor told me that he had to take some tests and blood tests, and he would call me later that afternoon, and I said, fine. And so we went back home and waited for our doctor to call. And he called later that afternoon, and he said, Mrs. Gibbs, your daughter has a serious problem. We believe that your daughter has leukemia. And what we need you to do right now is we need you to pick her up and put her in your car and take her to Buffalo Children's Hospital. It's about 30 minutes from Niagara Falls. And when you do so, be extremely careful. Do not put a seatbelt on her or a harness. Do not squeeze her, and do not allow her to bump her head, because any bump on your daughter's body between now and the time you get to the hospital could cause an internal hemorrhage, and we could lose her. And then the doctor, in his wisdom, I love doctors, said, please stay calm. Yeah, right. Okay, so I'm calm. So I put my daughter in the hospital, in the car, and we carefully drove to the hospital, and we got in the hospital, and the doctor said that they, took some more blood, and they said that she was very dangerous, that her platelets were almost non-existent. Platelets is what clog your blood. And said that what they needed to do in order to find out if Melissa had leukemia was to do a bone marrow test. But they said because of her platelet count and her other blood count, that they were fearful about giving her any anesthetic. And so they asked me if I could please hold my daughter down while they performed this surgery. And at first, of course, I agreed to do so. I'm a mother. I can deal with this. I can be brave. And so I went in and I tried to calm my little girl down, but she was too young to understand. She had no clue what was happening. She was scared to death. And she started to scream and cry. And as she cried, her nose began to bleed. The blood vessels under her skin burst from the intensity of her screams. Her gums started to bleed. And the doctor pulled out a needle that looked about 12 inches long that they were going to insert into her hip. And I just decided I couldn't do this. I couldn't stand there and help them do this to my daughter. And I walked out of this room and I stood outside this emergency room and listened to my daughter say, screaming at me, "Mama, please come back. Mama, I promise I'll never be bad again. Please, Mama, they're hurting me." All that while this was happening to my daughter, and all while this was happening to my son, and all while this was happening to my neighbors, the city of Niagara Falls, the county of Niagara, the state of New York, and the Federal Environmental Protection Agency all knew that our children were dying. In fact, 2 years before this, there was a study that they had done to look at the landfill, which was full of toxic waste, and determine what the risks were. And in this study, it said that the families who lived around the Love Canal landfill were at imminent health risk. Some of the homes had levels of chemicals in their basements that were above standards for an adult male in the workplace 40 hours a week. These are homes in which children, pregnant women, were living 24 hours a day. And in this report, and this was my first realization of how do decisions get made in this country, in this report, it talked about a cost-benefit analysis. Cost-benefit analysis. Shoot, I had no clue. Did anybody know about cost-benefit analysis before you got involved in this stuff? I looked at this cost-benefit analysis and it said, in order to protect the health of the people who lived at Love Canal, it would cost approximately $20 million to clean up the site. And then it went on to say that the people who would benefit from this expenditure would be Love Canal residents. Love Canal residents, on an average, only made $10,000 a year. So when you looked at the cost-benefit analysis, they decided that we, working cats, blue-collar people, were not worth $20 million. They decided that it was okay for us to be poisoned. They decided, because my husband made $10,000 a year working in the chemical factory, that we were expendable. That's when I realized that it isn't a matter of science, that it isn't a matter of policy, that it's a matter of fighting politically to win justice in this country. But how do you organize and how do you fight them? I had no clue. I was a mom. And before that, I was a bad student. So what do you do? So I thought, well, one thing they do is like, I'm a mom, I'm home all the time, people are always knocking on my door, I'll go knock on some doors. That was a very courageous thing for me to do. For those shy folks, 2 weeks I practiced saying, "Hi, my name is Lois Gibbs, I live on 101st Street, and I'm concerned about the children in this community." I had a dog called Fearless, it was also a piece of the American dream. And Fearless and I shook hands every day as I practiced my speech that I was going to give. And I went to the very first door, and I knocked on the very first door, and I know they had a dog there, and they had several children, and nobody answered the door. And so I just stood there very bravely. And then I realized that I had knocked so light their dog didn't even hear me. So I ran all the way home and said, "This is insane. People are going to think I'm insane if I go knocking on their door talking about toxic waste." But I realized down the line, just a few days later, my son Michael got pneumonia and he was put in the hospital. And in those days, they had these plastic like tents that went over the beds, and they had moisture dripping from the tents. And as I was sitting there watching the drips go down and my son was sleeping, I realized that the reason Michael was in the hospital was not Occidental Petroleum's fault. They dumped the waste solely. And it wasn't the city of Niagara Falls or the state or the federal's fault totally. In part, the reason my son was there was because I was afraid of knocking on doors. That I now had to share in that responsibility because I now knew. And so I went back out and I started knocking on doors and I started talking to people. And we found out at Love Canal some pretty devastating health effects. We found that 56% of our children were born with birth defects. We had children who were born with 3 ears, double rows of teeth, extra fingers, extra toes, and mentally retarded. When we presented this information, and for those who have already been through this understand, the cancer is not from the fire, it's from your eating habits or your lifestyle, and those children's mothers were probably doing drugs. That's why they were misbehaving in school. At Love Canal, they said the reason that Love Canal residents had so many children with birth defects is because we were a clustering of bad genetic pool. When we said that women at Love Canal in this study that we did, 22 women became pregnant during 1 year, and only 4 normal babies were born from those 22 pregnancies. The rest of the pregnancies ended in miscarriages, stillborn babies, or birth defected children. When we presented this to the state, they said, well, you have to understand that these women really didn't have miscarriages. How do you know that? I talked to these women, that's what they said. They really had legal abortions and didn't want to tell their husbands. For every problem that existed at Love Canal, the reason for the problem had nothing to do with Love Canal. It had to do with lifestyle, it had to do with our genetic pool, it had to do with women having abortions, it had to do with everything but. And if that wafer plant came here, and you all start complaining about asthma and bone disease and systemic poisoning of your bodies and your children's bodies, guess what they're going to say? It's not the wafer plant. They're within regulations. They're probably below regulations. You know what it is? It's the ozone. It's all of you people with all of your cars every single day out there that's creating this problem. It will be anything and everything except for what it really is that plant down the street is going to poison you. That's a fact. At Love Canal, we thought we could fight it scientifically, which is why we did those studies. We thought if we prove scientifically, using good data and good scientists and good research, that the contaminants were poisoning us, that they would do the right thing. And they did not. We thought we could win legally, and we fought legally. But the truth of the matter is it's not illegal to poison people. As long as you only poison them a little bit, and only if you have a couple accidents, that it is perfectly legal to poison people. So we fought politically. And political fighting is the most difficult fighting. I've worked in Arizona on many occasions, and I know that the people in Arizona are polite people. And polite people get poisoned. The people in New York, as my friend will attest, fellow New Yorkers there, we're rude, we're crude, we're mean, we come out punching. Now, I'm not suggesting that you change your social culture, but I am suggesting in this struggle, if you continue to be polite, you are going to continue to be poisoned. It's just that simple. And it's a very hard step to take. At Love Canal, the first thing that we did was carry picket signs. How many of you have done that? How many of you felt comfortable the first time you did that? All I could think of is, what is my mother going to say? What is my mother going to say? We carried signs to meetings because all of the meetings, and I know most of you have probably gone to at least city council meetings. Boy, you got some dogs on city council, ladies and gentlemen. meetings for public participation and input are designed for them, by them, to beat you. Everybody gets 5 minutes at the beginning, right? If you take 6 minutes, you're insulted. If you raise your voice, what do they say? Not polite. They insult you. Excuse me, you're talking about killing my family, destroying my property values, ruining my city, and I'm not allowed to raise my voice? Whose rule is that? Whose rule is that? They set up these rules, and they set up little things, and they've had many years of practice. Well, if we tell them they're being rude, they'll lower their voices. If someone was telling me I was being rude, I'd say, you want to know what rude is? If you play their game by their rules, you're less likely to win. If you play the game by your rules, you're more likely to win. There are public hearings that we had at Love Canal, and these were legal hearings. And in legal hearings, they have lawyers. I don't like lawyers, but I know Steve likes lawyers. So I won't speak badly about lawyers. But they had their lawyers and we had our lawyers. And actually our lawyers were very much like Steve's lawyers in that they understood the system. If you just do lawsuits, you lose. But if you include lawsuits and political organizing, you have a shot at winning, a much better shot. So at Love Canal, when they had these hearings, there was an issue of standing. Standing means whether your witness can testify or not. So there was an issue of standing. And the other issue that they used, or words that they used in the process, was talking about points of order. Now, the lawyers all know what that means. I still don't have a clue. But they kept on using the word standings and point of order. So we went to 2 of these meetings, and we figured out this is what they do. So what do we want to do? We want to blow up the process because the process doesn't work. So what we did is we brought a whole lot of people to the next hearing, and the next time they said that our witness, Lois Gibbs, because she doesn't have a PhD, because she doesn't have all of these credentials, has no standing as a witness, 500 people stood up in the audience and shouted, "We have standing," and stomped their feet. All of a sudden, the judge and the hearing officer said, okay, let her talk. It was a way in which we could get into the system. It was nonviolent. I certainly don't advocate violence, even though I use the word blow up. I don't mean that in a literal sense of the word. And it was a way to begin to take control. When they kept on saying, when the other attorney, we never did this with our attorney, of course, when the other attorney kept on saying point of order, we would all stand up and say cheeseburger, French fries. We'd all point in order. And the process suddenly became what it really was. It was a circus, it was pretend, it was a facade to make us believe that we had gone through a system that was fair and just, that will bring about fairness and justice to all, when in fact the system was geared for them. At public meetings, where you can only speak for 5 minutes, how many have gone to those? How long do they let you speak here? 3? Wow. Public meetings, and well, let me ask this other question. Who gets to be the first speakers?
No, we do. The public does, and they bring in the big guys.
Oh, they do. In most places, they let the opponents speak first. Those who come in with their 3-piece suits that are either from the agency or are from the corporation, or that they get to speak, and they get to speak as long as they want. They are not required to speak for only 2, 3, or 5 minutes. Whose rule is that? Skip's rule. But is it written? I mean, if you spoke for 5 minutes, would you go to jail? What would happen, for example, if you all went to the next meeting and you all demanded that you get to speak for as long as you felt you needed to convey how you feel. And it may be 3 minutes, but it could be a half hour. What would happen?
In Scottsdale, they call the police.
They would call the police and they would remove you from the room.
Absolutely.
And how long would it take to remove you one by one by one? I doubt that they'll put you in jail. If you leave nicely when they ask you to leave. Would they put you in jail? Well, you need to figure it out. And maybe you do need to go to jail, and maybe just a certain group goes to jail, the rest doesn't go to jail. But how come Skip doesn't go to jail? He ought to go to prison. Well, actually, that was my idea for future land use of the building because it's 3/4 built. That could be a reform school for politicians who got it wrong. Teach them what it really means. There has to be a way that you need to think about that's within your culture. And I'm not suggesting people get arrested. If that's not something folks are comfortable with, you should not do that. But there needs to be a way in which you can bring back the power of democracy. We live in a democracy, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll bet you those rules are not written in a way in which you will go to jail. Not legally so. Usually those are procedural rules. And if you break them, you do not go to jail. It's not like going through a stop sign. It's not like shooting somebody. And you should look at those rules. Because if you break the rules, you gain power. But you have to break them in a nonviolent, peaceful way. At Love Canal, we did all of these things. We held prayer vigils outside of City Hall while people were testifying inside. That we got our churches involved in that way and did walks of concerns. That we burnt our mayor was Michael Laughlin, and he's just like Skip, maybe they're related. Although Michael Laughlin actually got caught taking bribes, I understand that Skip has not been found guilty of such a crime yet. Michael Laughlin, we used to burn on a regular basis in effigy at different places throughout the city. We would carry signs. We would go to places, and this is one thing that you might want to think about. All of your city council belong to something else. They either have a business, they belong to a church somewhere, do they belong to a country club? Where do they belong? Your lives are being made miserable. You are all here amongst all of us wonderful people and got new friends, but there are other things you could do tonight rather than sit here and listen to me and listen to everyone else. Why should they get to go out to dinner? Why should they get to go to the country club? Why should they get to go to picnics instead of having fundraisers? Or go to Japan and cut a deal. Skip wouldn't do that. I don't believe it. Skip's a good guy. Find out where they go and make their lives miserable. Let me tell you how you can do that in a peaceful, gentle sort of way. One of the things you can do is go to a country club, for example, where Skip and his friends do enjoyment. One of the things that they hate is to be publicly embarrassed amongst their peers. You can attack them at City Hall, but that's okay because that's their job. You can say whatever you say, but that's okay, that's their job. But if you go to the country club and say something bad about Skip, I bet you he'll be really mad. In Pennsylvania, what they did is they took a wanted poster and they put their equivalent to Skip on the wanted poster. And they said wanted for wanting to poison our community. Wanted for killing children, and I don't know, they had a whole list of things. And then they went to the country club parking lot and they put a wanted poster underneath every single person's windshield wiper. The wanted poster made its way into the country club, and the good old boys were joking about it with a beer in their hand, saying, "Hey, look at this." Well, needless to say, this guy got very upset, and he ran out to the parking lot and began ripping off all of the wanted posters. Well, while he was doing it, all of his good buddies, his peers, people he's trying to impress, connections he's trying to make, are standing there laughing at him. It was the most devastating thing that ever happened to him in his entire life, and he turned around on the issue because he never, ever, ever wanted another person to ever do that to him again. How dare they? Okay, you win. And he gave the folks what they wanted. He didn't give it to them because it was scientifically right. It was technically right. He gave it to them because it was politically right. And the same is true all the way up. At Love Canal, we use the political system every step of the way. In 1978, they said they were going to evacuate pregnant women and children under 2 only. That if you were, and my daughter was 2.5 at that point, if you were had a child over 2 or you were not pregnant, you could not leave Love Canal. We knew that if it affected pregnant women and children under 2, it affected us all. And we also knew that we had to affect the governor, who had the power to expand that relocation benefit, that we had to affect him in some way politically. So what we did, and something you all can do through your coalition, is we joined with people all across New York State, and everywhere Governor Hugh Carey went, we had somebody carry a sign and pass out flyers for Love Canal. So when he was in New York City, there were signs there talking about Love Canal, and media representatives were getting flyers. When he was in different places throughout New York, when he was doing ribbon cutting, when he was doing ceremonial things, somebody was always there. And the governor got really mad because he didn't like to be dogged about this single issue. And everywhere he went was a single issue. We even went to his $1,000 a plate fundraiser events. Has anybody ever gone to one of those? Too bad, I thought I might get you a big donor. Well, we went to them, but we never could get in because we didn't have $1,000 either. But what we did do is we handed out flyers about how Governor Hugh Carey was allowing people at Love Canal to remain and die. And he knew if it hurt pregnant women and children under 2, that it was going to hurt us all. And how dare he? So we handed out these flyers as these women in gowns and men in sort of those, tuxedos, penguin suits. We're sort of walking in, and they looked at him, and they thought it was a joke. And they went in and they started talking about, because we didn't know somebody who was on the inside, about the radicals and the weirdos and the crazies out front, and what do these people want. But the whole $1,000 plate dinner, suddenly the discussion was not transportation, it was not the school budget, it was not the highway in New York City that they've been struggling over for years. The conversation at the $1,000 plate dinner was Love Canal. And the governor had to address it to the $1,000 donors of his campaign. He didn't like that. And because he didn't, and that's what I mean by gently making it uncomfortable. It's not illegal, it's not wrong, it's information shared. As a result of that, Governor Hugh Carey said, all right, if we stay away from his stuff, he'll come and visit with us. And he'll talk to us about relocating a larger a larger community. And so we said, fine. And then Governor Hugh Carey told us when he was going to come, and then we organized. For every meeting that you're going to attend, for every hour of that meeting, you need at least 2 hours of organizing for every hour of meeting. Rule of thumb. We spent 4 days locked up in my basement, the leadership of Love Canal, trying to figure out when Governor Hugh Carey comes, what is it we can do to force him to give us the answer to our question, and that answer be the only answer that we wanted, which was more relocation. After 4 days and some cases of beer and several cases of wine and other sort of things, we emerged with a plan. It was a great plan. And so we had to go sell it to our community. And that was easy because one of the things we did in our organizing at Love Canal is we had street representatives. So we had one person who was responsible for 10 homes on the street. So all we needed to do was call the tree of people, and they would go knock on doors. It wasn't a telephone tree, because it's too easy for people to say yes or no on the phone and hang up, but it was a door knocking tree. So the word spread, and Governor Hugh Carey was coming to Love Canal, and the media was there, and the governor came, and he spoke elegantly. I mean, you would have voted for him. You really would have. He was so wonderful. And then after he got done, one of the things we negotiated with his folks was a question and answer period. They gave us one question. That's all they would give to us. But at least we got one. We started off with, we don't want them to speak. Just answer questions, and it narrowed it down. So we had one question. So the governor got done speaking, and then our plan went into effect. I raised my hand because I had the question. I was delegated by the group to ask the question. And throughout, we had 500 people in the audience. Throughout the audience, the governor's looking for somebody else to call on. And throughout the audience, we had our people place. And anybody who raised their hand other than myself, somebody would grab their arm down. So throughout the auditorium, you heard, ooh, what are you doing? Leave me alone. Don't touch me. Because if you think about it, these meetings and these informational things, they know Steve. They're not going to call on Steve. And you, as a community, need to support Steve. If Steve has a question, everybody else put their hands down until his question's asked. You have to look around and support people in your group who is being ignored. And the reason they're generally ignored is because they know the hard questions to ask. So at Love Canal, we maintained it so that my hand was the only one up, and it was getting a little embarrassing that he wouldn't call on me. And, the media's all looking at him. When the governor comes the troops of media. And so finally he said, yes, please identify yourself, ma'am, and ask your question. So I identified myself, and then I asked my question in a very slow, long intro. Because while I was asking my question, down the center aisle of the auditorium came 3-, 4-, and 5-year-old children, all dressed in their Sunday best, all standing in the stage was elevated from the floor, all standing in a semicircle around the podium on the floor. They were all told they would get an ice cream cone if they folded their hands in front of them and looked up at the governor and didn't move. So the children were very well behaved. They wanted their ice cream. So they all walked down and they folded their hands in front of them and looked up at the governor. And then I asked the question, which was, Governor Hugh Carey, are you going to allow these 3-, 4-, and 5-year-olds, because 2 and under have already been relocated, are you going to allow these children to remain at Love Canal and die? And the governor's like, the cameras are rolling. Print media's pen is primed. They're ready to write. Everybody's snapping pictures, and the governor's... Because he couldn't say, and we thought a lot about this locked up in my basement for 4 days. He couldn't say, well, I'm going to study it, right? And he couldn't say, well, I'll get some engineers to look at it. Or he couldn't say, there was nothing he could say except for, of course not. I'm not going to allow these children to die. And he evacuated all 239 families that evening. But it was because we organized and we thought about what's going to happen, what are they going to do, how do we react, who is around us, and we got evacuation. His people were crazy in the background. Where's he going to get the money from? What is he nuts? And we knew it was a surprise. We knew that we had succeeded and that it was a surprise, that they had no intentions of doing that. That's the type of political organizing you all need to do here. When I talk about Love Canal and the health problems, it could be in this community. No, it's not going to be Love Canal. No, it's not the same chemicals. And maybe, no, it's not 56% birth defect rate. But yes, it will be something. Yes, it is chemicals. Yes, it is poison. And you all have a chance that we never had. You have a chance to stop it. And whatever it takes, and I know my fellow men and women, toxic activists that are in this room that talked earlier will tell you, whatever it takes, you got to stop it, because you can't take it back. When you lose a child, you can't replace it. When you lose a child, the child is gone. It's gone forever. When you lose a kidney, it's gone forever. When you lose a breast, it's gone forever. You can't go back. And you have the chance here that we didn't have. And the communities who are suffering now have a chance to do clinics and help people who are already there. A chance that we also didn't have at Love Canal, because when we were evacuated, we were dispersed. I want to close by just saying two things that I think are important. One is that EPA has recently come out with a study on dioxin, and I'm sort of on a dioxin tour, which is one of the ways I got here today. And the study on dioxin says that every man, woman, and child today is at or near full of dioxin, and that you got full of dioxin through eating meat and eating dairy products, yogurt, cheese, milk, and so forth. Dioxin causes cancer, immune system suppression. It was something that was at Love Canal. It causes attention deficit disorders, learning disabilities, infertility, and birth defects. Every man, woman, and child, according to EPA, this is not a radical fringe group. Every man, woman, and child in this country is at or near full of dioxin. Why is this important to you? Not only because you need to know about dioxin and how it gets in your food supply and how it gets into your body, but if you're already full of dioxin today, what will happen when this facility adds to that? 90% of your dioxin in your body is already in your body as a result of mostly your food chain. What is going to happen when these chemicals add to that? And what has happened to the folks who have already been exposed to the fires and other things that added to it? Dioxin is a very deadly chemical. We have books on the back for folks who might want to purchase them. Half of the money for the books goes to Don't Waste Arizona?
Coalition.
To the coalition. Half of the money goes to the coalition. The other half of the money just pays for the book. There's no profit here except for to the coalition, which is important. But the great thing about this book is not the first part that tells you what dioxin is, how it gets in your body, and what it does to you. And it's written in layman's terms so we all can understand it. The best part of this book is the second part. All the things I talked to you about, how do you organize, how do you not be polite. Dioxin's the front part of the issue because it's important to learn about and know. But the second part of it is the organizing manifesto, as EPA calls it. It would be a good book if you didn't have the manifesto in the back. So the EPA manifesto is in the back and how to go about fighting and winning. I wish you all luck in your struggles. I know it's a hard struggle. I've been there, but I am living proof that you don't have to be very bright. I wasn't very bright in high school. That you don't have to be very sophisticated. You could even be rude and crude. But as long as you just stick with it and remember that the government is not your friend. And the elected officials that are in office in this city and other cities who don't behave need to be replaced, ladies and gentlemen.
Right.
We have to leave our children with something, unfortunately, most of us don't have, which is a real democracy. Right now, those who are running our cities and our state houses don't represent the people in this country. And it's not enough to sit back and say, I don't want to vote because it's a lesser of two evils, or I don't like the way Skip behaves. We need to be active, and we need to involve our children actively in the political arena. If Skip doesn't behave, get his butt out of there.
Right.
Yes, sir.
If the governor doesn't do what you want to do, get their butt out of here too.
Wow.
It's true, we don't have much money, but in this country there are two sources of power. One is money, and the other is people. And you can do that. And you need to look around in this room or in the next meeting room and find out who would make a good city council member. Who amongst your ranks makes sense? And who in your state would make a good governor someday? Who could be the governor in 2008? And how do you today begin to move that person through the process? That it's not enough to continue to just react to what we're being offered by corporations, because that's who's offering these people to us. We need to take an active role. We didn't revolt against King George to have King Skip. I know this for a truth. This is the truth. We need to take an active role in politics. I know people are uncomfortable with that. I'm not suggesting you be a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, or anything else. Whatever party you are, take an active role and get involved and drag your kids along with them and get them excited about it. And let's take back our country from the corporations. Let's take back our country from where it is now.